Now, you may have lots of time on your hands the next week or two, which is great, because if you do, you can go to a protest and wave a Hezbollah flag, you know, and by the way, did you see what happened in Lebanon? Was it just yesterday or the day before? There's a gay cinema. I mean, it's amazing. There's actually a gay theatre in Lebanon, and I think that's a Christian influence in that country. It wouldn't happen elsewhere in the Middle East. And the police arrested 36 gay men, humiliated them. They gave them, this is not a joke, anal probes just to humiliate these guys. And that's mild for the Arab world. That's mild for the Arab world. Lebanon, Hezbollah influence. Well, they're waving Hezbollah flags in Toronto and other major cities in this country. Steve McDonald is from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Now, there's going to be another demonstration.
Yes.
So when is it? Because we've got to get down there. We really have. I'll take my ham sandwiches.
So it is an annual event. This year, August 18th, it'll be held. As you know, last year we filmed the event. We provided that footage to Sun so you could share it with your viewers. And at last year's event, you know, we saw Israel referred to as a cancer that needs to be killed.
Fair enough.
Israelis
yes.
called bloodsuckers, inhuman and racist. And as you mentioned, Hezbollah flags were flown.
Yeah.
And so I think we have reason to believe that the exact same thing will unfold this month.
Yeah. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. It is condemned by most countries in the world, all the civilized ones. We're not talking here about an organization that is trying to do good and improve the world. It's based on terror. It's supported by Iran. And, of course, Assad in Syria. We know the way he behaves. It's quite incredible that people are allowed to fly these flags in public. I thought it was illegal to fly the Hezbollah flag.
So my understanding is that it's not incitement, it's not illegal in that sense. However, at Queen's Park itself, there is a policy that governs the use of the legislature's grounds, and the Sergeant-at-Arms oversees that policy.
Right.
In that policy, it allows the Sergeant-at-Arms to deny permits to groups that intend to use the grounds for, quote, hate propaganda. And I think when you look at last year's rally, it's clear that they violated the terms of the permit. We have provided this information to the Sergeant-at-Arms. My understanding is a decision hasn't been made, but we're hopeful that the permit will be rejected.
But there are people who will say, hey, it's just a protest. It's against Israel, and you support Israel, so you're angry, but they've got a right to be there.
Well, I mean, if they weren't willing to abide by the terms of the permit, then I don't know why they wouldn't walk a few blocks to the east and protest down Yonge Street. But the fact is that the policy states that Queen's Park cannot be abused in this way. And that's, again, to say nothing of the right to protest somewhere else. I should also point out that, as you know, there are anti-Israel protests periodically by a very small faction of anti-Israel activists throughout the country. And in the vast majority of those protests, you don't hear anti-Semitic slogans. You don't see terrorist groups glorified. And therefore, all of those protests, while I may disagree with them, are completely above board in a Canadian context.
But this is different because this is Al-Quds, isn't it?
Al-Quds, yes.
Which is, it's meant to mean Jerusalem. I don't know if it does. Jerusalem's not actually mentioned in Quranic literature, but this word is, and it's meant to be the third holiest place in Islam. That's a rather tenuous connection. And it was, I believe, the Ayatollah Khomeini, was it not, who initiated this?
Correct.
So it is Iranian. Iran is far more than about Palestine. It's about conquering the Middle East. They deny the Holocaust. They say Jews, not Israelis, Jews are the problem. Gay men are publicly hanged in Iran. I don't know why there isn't a coalition of liberal, gay, feminist, Jewish, labor organizations all coming forward to say, issue. This protest should not be allowed.
Well, I agree with your perspective on this, because if you look at it, this has to do with much more than just the Jewish community, much more than just Israel. You're right, the Ayatollah Khomeini launched this event in 1979 as a way to export the Islamic Revolution. And when you look at the glorification of the Ayatollahs, when you look at the glorification of Hezbollah, and when you combine this with the fact that reports increasingly indicate that the Islamic regime of Iran is looking to spread its extremist ideology into Canada through Iranian expats and segments of Canada's Muslim population. Because of all these factors, I don't think taxpayers should be forced to sit back and watch this group be given a permit to protest on our legislature's grounds.
It seems very likely that the murder of Israelis in Bulgaria was connected to Hezbollah and Iran.
Absolutely.
We know that the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires some years ago was the work of Hezbollah and Iran. We know that Iran called for the murder of Salman Rushdie. We're allied to Great Britain. Rushdie came to this country as well. So they called for direct breaking of the law in this country and elsewhere. I'm just stunned. I'm stunned that this... How many people go to this bloody demonstration?
So last year, if you look at the video, there's it's hard to estimate, but perhaps 100, 150. I wouldn't say more than 200, but in that range.
And what sort of people?
They are a Shia Muslim organization, so they would be a mix of folks. Some would be of Lebanese descent, some would be of Pakistani descent. But they are connected to this organization, CASMO, which is a GTA-based organization that has connections to extremism on various fronts. Right. And so I think people need to take this very seriously.
And that's an acronym for something, is it?
For the Canadian Shia Muslim Organization, or Canadian Association, I should say, of Shia Muslim Organizations.
Right. And who are the guys around? I mean, who are the guys in charge?
So Zafar Bangash is one of the main speakers.
Oh, he always crops up, doesn't he?
Correct. Zafar Bangash is involved with the...
Isn't he a Pakistani fellow who pretends to be Iranian?
I'm not sure exactly what his passport says, or past passports say, but he runs the Islamic Islamic Society of York region. Right. He is connected to a whole bunch of activities that I think Canadians would be particularly uncomfortable to hear about in our own backyard.
Such as?
Such as, for example, his organization is linked to the East End Madrasa. As you're quite aware of what happened just a few months ago, the East End Madrasa in Toronto was using Toronto District School Board property to spread a curriculum that said some particularly nasty things about Jews and even spread the message of jihad to children. Right. And so this is very disturbing.
You've got to get them early, though. You don't want them, watching TV and being distracted. You've got to get them into jihad when they're young.
No, I know you're being glib, but I mean, the fact is, I think most Canadians see this stuff, and they rightly understand that this has nothing to do with, in the case of Al-Quds, criticism of Israeli policies. This has nothing to do with political activism. This is clearly an effort on the part of a very small group to import a vicious ideology into our shores. Look, on behalf of the Iranians.
I agree with you. I think they're a bunch of losers and extremists, and they play games, and they pretend to be all radical, and in fact, they're just pretty sad people. But I mean, aren't you giving them more publicity and exposure by doing this? Let them have their little protest. Most good, decent, ordinary, normal Canadians walk past and look at them with utter contempt. The police stand there thinking, oh, why do we have to do this? And it's all over. You're giving a bit of oxygen to these people. You're allowing the sewer to breathe a little.
So I actually, I take your point, but I think it's a good thing. I think the light of day is the best sanitizer for this stuff, and I think that by us providing this material to Sun TV, for example, it exposes for average Canadians, people who aren't interested in the Middle East, probably not Jewish, exposes for those folks exactly the sort of extremism that's taking place in our country. And I have to say, at the time of last year's rally, two people in response, both said to me the same thing, and these are two non-Jewish people who aren't interested in the Middle East. They said, you wouldn't think to see this in our country. And I think that speaks volumes about what's happening here.
Yeah, I don't actually think it has anything really to do with Jews or Israel, because if Israel didn't exist, if Jews didn't exist, nothing would change. It's about world domination. It's about imposing Sharia law everywhere. In areas, Bradford, Burnley, Brussels, Malmo in Sweden, it's not about Israel or Jews, it's about Muslims, when they feel a certain power, saying, you will now do what we tell you to do. And this is a small but nasty manifestation of that. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks for having me.